Welcome to this webinar on implementing the TCFD recommendations and maximizing the opportunity in the low-carbon transition. My name is Michael Zimani, and I will be moderating this webinar today. And we have quite a packed agenda for you, so hopefully you will leave with a few helpful tips at the end of this webinar. So today we are really talking about the recommendations of the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures in the context of the opportunity that it presents to businesses and the financial markets at large. To begin with, I wanted to introduce you to the Climate Disclosure Standards Board. The CDSB is an international consortium of business and environmental NGOs. We are committed to providing decision-useful environmental and climate change information to markets via the mainstream corporate report, that is the annual reports of companies. We are a consortium of 9 NGOs, the logos of which you can see on this screen. And the collection of our work is summarized in the CDSB framework, which is a document that helps you integrate climate change and environmental information into your mainstream report, that is your annual report. It comprises of 7 guiding principles that helps you with how to report this information in the context of your annual report, and 12 reporting requirements, which are really based and aligned with existing reporting provisions such as CDP, GRI, SASB, and many existing regulations in place to help you use what you have already produced rather than start from scratch. And of course, the CDSB framework has been recently updated to be more in line with the TCFD recommendations, so hopefully it is also a helpful tool for you to use as you embark on implementing the recommendations. The CDSB framework is used by over 370 corporations globally, but we do not restrict our operations to the planet. We are very proud to say that NASA also uses the framework as part of its climate risk management plan. So let's dive into the recommendations. Hopefully by this point you have seen the TCFD recommendations report. It's a rather long document, so I just wanted to summarize a few key points to set the scene for today's webinar. As you know, the recommendations are a voluntary set of recommendations. They are developed by a private sector group for the private sector, and they are focusing on climate-related financial disclosures in mainstream financial filings of companies. They have a specific focus on the financial sector as well as high-risk non-financial sectors, but they are really applicable to all sectors. And they have a particular focus on risks as part of that transitional risks, which are associated with the transition to a low-carbon economy, as well as physical risks that might pose a risk to a business. But of course, risks are just one side, opportunities are equally important. An important aspect of the recommendations are scenario analysis. This is a relatively new concept in the world of climate change reporting. So we'll actually have my colleague Peter give you a bit more of a deep dive into that area in particular to help you get started. And of course, it's another focus of this disclosures are not just backward-looking information, but forward-looking information across short, medium, and long terms, and they cover qualitative and quantitative information as well. Just to give you a bit of a perspective, I wanted to also highlight that our work is very much aligned with the TCFD's work. You can see the principles that guide our framework and the TCFD's work as well. As you can see, they are almost identical, and this is very much on purpose. We see reporting landscape very much as an area where the sum of its parts make up more in its whole. The TCFD has been very popular. There have been a lot of positive statements by companies, but also from the investment community. This slide is a non-exhaustive list of investment organizations, be that asset managers, pension funds, etc., who have publicly supported or recommended the use of the TCFD recommendations. So you can see that the idea of these recommendations being focused on the financial sector have been very well achieved, and there is sufficient interest from the finance community to see disclosures in line with the TCFD recommendations. The recommendations, as I mentioned, are voluntary, but they have brought the interest of regulators as well globally. Again, this is a non-exhaustive list, but I just wanted to have an indication for you in terms of which jurisdictions are looking at the recommendations in particular, to give you an idea of perhaps the shape of things to come in the future. One piece of research we have completed recently is a review of companies' existing reports through the CDP reporting process to get an idea of where companies stand in relation to the TCFD. And this global review has been quite successful and quite interesting. We have some quite interesting results. You can find the report on our website. But just in summary, we see that there is a good level of board-level oversight on climate change, and we see some risks and opportunities related to climate change being disclosed and integrated into company-wide processes. But there is perhaps a bit more to do around the risk management side of things, perhaps incentivizing management and board to get more engaged in this process, and perhaps a bit more work to be done also on the narrative side of things, but with good coverage of most of the quantitative metrics that are used by companies in relation to the TCFD recommendations. So, we've all heard about the TCFD recommendations. Why should we care about them? Are they good for our business? Well, we believe they are. They are essentially a way for a business to more effectively communicate with their current and potential investors, as well as a lot of the functions within the business that has a stake in managing climate risk and realizing climate opportunities. The most important aspect of the recommendations is they are really geared to help you speak the language of finance. The reason for this is to help your investors, current and potential, to understand the work you are doing to safeguard your business and to understand the opportunities that these present. Hopefully this will secure more longer-term investment and perhaps new investment opportunities that have not been present in the past. This is because financial institutions, but also your internal finance functions, who are very crucial decision-making within your organization, can understand the risks and opportunities associated to climate change in a way that they can understand it. The recommendations are also a very good tool to test the future resilience of your business through, for example, scenario analysis, and they can also hopefully help you put the case for investing in the future of your business in a language that your fellow colleagues in other departments will understand more clearly. So, without further ado, let's see how you could get started. Getting started with the recommendations can be a bit of a challenge. It's a very long report and there are a lot of aspects to it, but we have put together a short list of 10 tips to help you get started. I will cover 3 of these, and then we will also provide you with a link to the full list and a bit more of a description about these. First of all, perhaps the most important aspect to get started is to make sure that you are working and collaborating across your organization. Often, sustainability is in a business is done in a silo. We obviously see much less of this happening these days, and we see other departments being engaged in this. But it's especially important with the TCFD recommendations to bring together sustainability, governance, compliance colleagues, but also finance and investor relations to make sure that you have a group that really embraces the entire organization, and what you report is really a good reflection of the entire business's thinking. It is also important to make sure that you get the most senior level of management of your business bought in. Often we see with businesses that are starting to implement the recommendations is that they actually start with a board level approval or a CEO level approval, sign off, to make sure that really have the buy-in across the organization. It's also important, in particular, it's important to get the audit and risk committees on board because they will play a key role. Again, this is making sure that you have the enabling conditions within your business to get started with the work, because it will be an overarching project that will really involve all aspects of the business. And finally, it's important to avoid reinventing the wheel. You already have an existing enterprise risk management system in your business. You have some risk management processes in place, and you have existing accounting systems that you use to collect information. So have a look at these systems, perhaps with your colleagues in finance or risk management, and see whether they could be adapted or evolved to also incorporate this type of information. And this is really important because this information is as financially material as any other information that your business collects, and bringing them into one system can really help you think of these aspects in a holistic way and help you manage the climate-related aspect of your work together with all other aspects. So I could go on and I could go through all of these recommendations that we have, but I wanted to make sure that we have enough time for other speakers as well. So here is a short overview of these tips, and you can view the full version at cdsb.net/checklist. We will also, of course, include a link in the follow-up email. So with that, I will hand over to Peter, who will be giving you a few more tips, in particular around scenario analysis. And we believe this is is also a really important way to optimize the opportunities of your business. So I will hand over to Peter with a question. Peter, is scenario analysis really an opportunity?
Thanks, Mike. Yes, I think certainly scenario analysis is going to represent a significant challenge for many organisations implementing TCFD recommendations, potentially a new discipline for many, but it's certainly going to be one of the key tools that can be utilised sort of informing strategic responses, mitigating risks, but also capitalising on the opportunities that a low carbon transition represents. So I just wanted to sort of first look at sort of how scenario analysis can be used in this way, drawing on some of the examples and the themes that are emerging from those who have begun to conduct scenario analysis, and also some of the strategic responses they're starting to communicate from their efforts. Then we're going to have a look at some of the practical first steps on conducting scenario analysis. Again, just going to be drawing on some of the lessons learned by those organisations that are starting to implement scenario analysis, but also some who have been doing scenario analysis for a little while now. And also some of the experts who are operating in this area, sort of some of their recommendations on how to conduct scenario analysis. Okay, so one of the sort of first ways that scenario analysis can start to add value is when looking at and assessing new capital investments or upgrades to existing assets. It's something to sort of bring a better understanding of potential client risks and opportunities that can affect asset values and performance over time frames that aren't really generally considered in sort of existing enterprise risk management processes or financial modelling frameworks. So one of the good examples of this, sort of sort of confirming some of the recommendations in TCFD themselves on energy efficiency. It's sort of widely regarded now in research communities that quite a large part of the required greenhouse gas emission abatement can occur at a negative cost, or obviously another way as a positive to cost saving to business. And it's really the short-term thinking that has been prohibiting this investment taking place. So yeah, a good example of how scenario analysis can really start to get companies thinking over longer-term timeframes, and doing that, it starts to tip the balance in favour of some of these investments when you start factoring in some potential carbon pricing or increased energy costs, and really the resilience that some of these investments can start to bring. One of the clear benefits of the low carbon transition will be the opportunities that are presented in low carbon products and services, some of the new markets that will certainly emerge, and certainly this is something that is already becoming quite widely apparent. There's strong evidence of changing consumer preferences for sustainable products, some premiums that can be involved in that, and the increases in revenues that businesses can gain. And scenario analysis is really going to give you one way that companies can start to identify and also anticipate some of these opportunities, and then in turn start to form strategic responses from these. One sort of good example is starting to really inform R&D expenditure, giving it some greater more focus and direction. And sort of following off that, organisations that certainly can use scenario analysis are going to be able to identify and react to these opportunities earlier. And certainly some are anticipating there's going to be some strong first mover advantages in these areas. So those organisations that are really going to capitalise on this can really gain some brand recognition, establish some technology leadership, and also there's going to be important aspects in terms of securing supply chains and resources to help them deliver these. One way that scenario analysis is certainly going to change thinking is potentially when looking at long-term physical risks in particular. Organisations have done and already are starting to identify exposure to wider environmental issues and natural capital risks from their impacts on natural capital and their dependencies on natural capital. These are often can be exacerbated by climate change, and previously unseen drivers of these can be identified. So companies can start looking at these and potentially see examples being overexploitation of water resources or deforestation, for example, and identifying these when looking at physical risks. And certainly in this realm as well, there's even room for opportunities. Potential opportunities like innovative markets, payments for ecosystem services, on developing and upgrading the necessary infrastructure. One thing that governments will certainly start to do, the UK being one of the pioneers in this, is forming clean growth strategies. As part of the Paris Agreement, governments have formed their nationally determined contributions to abating greenhouse gas emissions, and that is really starting to sort of translate into clean growth strategies. So one thing that will be an opportunity for organisations is really advocate their views and engage with governments when they're formulating these policies. And particularly scenario analysis can be used as forming an evidence base when engaging with governments and also business associations through which they advocate. There's certainly going to be, or there certainly is, a growing amount of funding and capital available for projects and businesses with positive environmental impact. Particularly, organisations can start to form proposals in light of forward-thinking scenario analysis, and it's certainly a way that they can start to increase the credentials for these projects that are being put forward for funding, yeah, will be potentially quite an invaluable tool in securing funding. So the low carbon transition is almost certainly going to require some quite disruptive changes to economies and markets. And one of the strategy responses is certainly going to be companies looking to form new business models and looking at new practices and operating. Again, scenario analysis is going to be one of the key tools, really, helping understand how these new market ecosystems may form, and again, informing strategy responses in adopting new business practices. This potentially could be forming new business partnerships and engaging with supply chains. There's sort of a nice quote from Elon Musk there, sort of looking at how they've started to form new strategies in terms of allowing open source patents that's hopefully going to allow them, other companies, to develop the services and infrastructure around their products that's going to help their own market penetration. And finally, one of the key aspects of scenario analysis, as certainly is an ongoing process, is going to be the signposting that's used. So that's really sort of formulating indicators of emerging trends that has been identified in scenario analysis, and then using those indicators to identify when these trends are emerging, and then be able to react to those arising opportunities. So, for instance, timing sort of market entries, and really sort of when to commit resources to start to capitalise on these opportunities. So, sort of remaining on the theme of Tesla there, so one quite good example might be certain price points for batteries, for example, sort of preempting quite uptakes in EVs, electric vehicles. So that's sort of an idea that companies might be able to sort of predict in a way some trends that emerge and make sure they're on the leading edge in that respect. Okay, so now we've seen sort of some of the ways which scenario analysis can potentially sort of inform strategy and help organisations capitalise on opportunities. We've also got some sort of practical first steps on really sort of how to start conducting this, again, sort of using some of the lessons learned from people that have started to implement this, and then also some experts in the field who are already providing good support. So just sort of reiterate Mike's point, really. It's the same with scenario analysis. Internal engagement and board level buy-in is really going to be key to making sure that scenario analysis is really delivered effectively and of use. One of the main things as well is going to be utilising those existing skills and resources in particularly finance teams and potentially risk teams. Utilising their skills, they already have some extremely transferable skills in this realm, and it's not something that can be really conducted effectively by just one department. And then similarly, sort of again without internal engagement and board buy-in, there's potential for scenario analysis and wider TCFD recommendations just to remain as a note in a report, and sort of really miss the point of these recommendations in terms of embedding in strategic thinking and sort of permeating across the organisation and remaining in mind when making strategic decisions. And sort of finally on this point, it's going to be important that scenarios are developed really collaboratively. It's going to be a great advantage if teams working together have a common language and understanding when working together, and that can really come from formulating these scenarios together. You've got sort of really going to help how making sure this is widely understood across the organisation and give them sort of real meaning. One of the sort of real key points with scenario analysis is to explore extremes and challenge conventional thinking. It's not a case of just extending out previous trends and previous history to try and predict a certain future. It's really looking at what are the potential plausible paths, and yeah, these certainly could play out in quite unexpected ways. So, I mean, the TCFD recommendations do specify the use of a 2-degree scenario, and certainly would advocate that as obviously being included and maybe be the central case, but it's going to require a number of scenarios to really stress test an organisation. We're sort of exploring the extremes of sort of the wedge of risk and opportunity. So just sort of referring to that diagram there, we've got the sort of some of the IPCC scenarios looking at potential extent of global temperature rises, and just looking at 2-degree scenario, you really do risk sort of overlooking some of the more worst case scenarios in terms of how if greenhouse gas emissions aren't abated, how this really could represent especially extreme physical risks, and these really do need to be considered. And really just, again, just challenging conventional thinking. So a lot of organisations starting to look at scenario analysis and implementing TCFD. When looking over longer time frames, a lot of second and third order risks and opportunities do start to become apparent, say changing economic conditions or impacts on supply chains. Next thing really is just to make sure an organisation understands where it is on this learning curve, and it is a learning curve. A lot of organisations may not be particularly advanced in terms of what they're looking at in understanding their environmental impacts and risks, and those organisations are really going to benefit from an initial high-level approach. They're not really going to be able to dive straight into this. It's going to need an initial scoping to establish the key areas of exposure and risk, as well as opportunity. Those organisations that are a little bit more advanced in terms of understanding environmental issues, like certainly like those organisations, many of you today will be working with CDP to disclose environmental risks and opportunities. If you have already identified particular areas of risk, then certainly an initial pilot into a deeper dive might be a better first step, starting to quantify material financial risks. But really, in both respects, this initial planning stage and piloting stage is going to be important. You're going to need to have to identify what key skills and resources and capacity is going to be needed going forward. And also, it's going to be a great way to sort of start to establish some guidelines for conducting scenario analysis going forward, to making sure this is a consistent and repeatable process, and really sort of forms a useful base going forward. So once you've really maybe identified where you are in terms of the learning curve, it's going to be important to select the most suitable approach. Generally, scenario analysis can be very broadly broken down into top-down versus bottom-up, and also holistic versus events-based. So those organisations that are sort of really on the start of this journey would benefit from a top-down approach initially, sort of screening the organisation as a whole, its full portfolio of assets and business footprint. This can often marry well what's often described as a holistic approach. So that's looking at global market macro trends, combining these together in terms of looking at various combinations, exploring these in scenarios, and then combining this with a full screening of assets to really identify areas of risk exposure and opportunities that present themselves. Those organisations have really started on this journey, potentially have identified areas of material risks and opportunity, and really would benefit to start looking at the business, breaking down the business into sort of granular units and individual assets, particularly where risk and opportunities are going to be varying for different units and potentially by market sector or geography. And this really does sort of quite marry well with what can be described as an events-based approach. So that's looking at particular policies for certain technologies in much greater detail, and sort of marrying these two together works well in terms of looking at deeper dives, answering specific questions, and really a good way of starting to inform strategy. One of the key things really with scenario analysis is making sure you take advantage of what's already out there. There's a vast range of resources. CSB is working been working with TCFD, recently launched the TCFD Knowledge Hub, and already that includes over 100 resources on scenario analysis alone. So looking at case studies of those who already conducted it, looking at some of the tools that are available to conduct scenario analysis, and looking at some of the guidelines that are on there. It's going to be one of the key things is really to make sure these are widely used by organisations, allowing sort of comparison to be made between those by referencing these and disclosing sort of what scenarios you've relied upon. But it's also a key point to sort of understand that each organisation will have its own unique risk and opportunity profile, based on the sectors it operates in, its geographies, and its own processes. So each individual organisation will ultimately will be working towards their own scenarios that are relevant for their own circumstance and business operations. One way, particularly when sort of maybe looking at some of the deeper dives of scenario analysis, is to make sure we make scenarios sort of fit for purpose. So that really means answering some of the questions of TCFD recommendations in evaluating material financial impacts, and also sort of informing your own strategy responses, making it useful for these. So it's quite simple in many respects, but just make sure, keeping in mind that scenarios are ultimately aiming to evaluate material financial impacts. And keeping that in mind, it starts to provide quite a useful logic for conducting scenario analysis. So looking at a business unit, what are revenues and costs, breaking it down very simply, and then examining particular drivers of those revenues and costs, and then looking at some of the sectors identified in TCFD recommendations on how some of the transition risks and opportunities and physical risks might impact on some of those drivers. And if you do establish materiality in terms of these, then examining that materiality in various scenarios. For example, with the diagram there, you can imagine revenues driven by consumer demand, and then market risks to changes in those consumer preferences that drive consumer demand, and then examining how those preferences might change under various scenarios. So it's a simplification of a process, but that simplification means that scenarios can really start to be used to answer specific questions and really start to be useful in informing strategy. And then finally, it's going to be a case of it's going to be working towards ultimate disclosure. It's not something that companies will be able to dive straight into and start to disclose. And certainly, it's important to make sure that processes are robust, they're put in place, and also that strategy responses have been formed when communicating and disclosing this information. It can be a common mistake to try and think and define what is good and correct. While there are maybe better practices than others in this respect, defining what is good and correct can maybe lead to a hesitancy to disclose, and also for companies to sort of wait for standards to emerge before starting on scenario analysis. But really, it's quite important not really to wait too much in this respect, as companies are really going to start to have to build capacity and skills. It's going to take time, and certainly developing their own scenarios. So ultimately, while you can reference scenarios and build on other scenarios, there's not going to be a simple off-the-shelf solution for your organisation, and it's important that you start to build those scenarios that are relevant and useful for your own individual organisation. I think which leads on well to the TCFD commitment.
Thank you very much, Peter, and thank you for your very practical tips. That hopefully all of you will be have taken good notes and have found all of these helpful. And please feel free to get in touch with us afterwards. And also, please feel free to ask us questions as we go along. You can use the chat function, and we will try to make sure that we have a bit of time at the end to answer a few of these questions. And just so you know, I've pasted the link to the TCFD Hub into the chat function, so you can click on it and have a look at it after the webinar. I think it's going to be a very helpful, well, we hope it's going to be a very helpful resource for getting started with the recommendations. But it's also very important to know that you don't need to go on this journey on your own. We are committed to supporting businesses in reporting decision useful information to their investors in their mainstream reports, which is fully aligned with the TCFD's mission as well. And we want to support businesses in going on this journey, and we want to help them. And we wanted to present two ways that we can support you. First of all, we are working with the Women Business Coalition on a commitment for companies to implement the TCFD recommendations as fully as practicable, again, realizing the journey that must be taken and the uniqueness of the business, so as fully as practicable within 3 years from the date of your commitment. It is a commitment to ensure also that there is consistent information that is reported, so we do request that you use the CDSB framework or any other applicable framework to report this information. Again, the CDSB framework is an option. We hope it's helpful, but it's not a requirement to use it as long as you use a widely used framework. This commitment has been made by a growing group of committed companies now, some of the leaders in the field, and this is really a group in which we collaborate and share experiences and build capacity. So we have regular capacity building meetings, we bring in experts, we are also available to these businesses to answer a few questions here and there, and we also want to make sure that we promote the leadership of these businesses. So as some of the first businesses in this group are already publishing their first iteration of TCFD reporting, we will be sharing this as widely as possible. We'll obviously be sharing it on the TCFD Knowledge Hub as well, to make sure that that they get the benefit of a first mover that they deserve. And obviously, it is a way for businesses to shape the way TCFD reporting is done in practice. So that's a very big first mover advantage. So we hope that this is something that's interesting to you. We would love to talk to you more about this. You can find out more about this at cdsb.net/commit, but please also feel free to get in touch with us. Our details will be in the follow-up email. We'd love to talk to you about this, and we think it's a really good opportunity to work in a constructive manner with a group of your peers to implement the TCFD recommendations in a more gradual way rather than having to do it much more quickly at a later stage. So I think hopefully it's a beneficial project. So this is a collaborative group that we have here, but we also have something a bit more tailored to help you, maybe a bit more of an in-depth support. And I will hand over to Gemma Clemens here, my colleague, who's a technical officer at TDSB, to tell you a little bit more about this. But really, this is a service that we provide that gives you one-on-one support with a bit, and it also looks at what you've already done. So, Gemma, over to you.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, so my name's Gemma, and I manage the Beyond Disclosure program here at CDSB. And as we've heard today, there are plenty of ways in which you can maximise opportunities through the TCFD recommendations, especially through scenario analysis. But a good place for companies to start is to look at what you are already doing and what you are already disclosing. As Peter mentioned in his presentation, it's really important to understand where your organisation is on the learning curve, but also on the implementation curve. For example, if you disclose to CDP, if you have an integrated report, if you are using the CDSB framework, or if you are required to comply with the EU Non-Financial Reporting Directive, it's quite likely that you are already doing some of the elements of the TCFD recommendations. So what we do at CDSB is we're offering this service that is designed to support you in finding out where you are on that curve, so where you are on that journey towards implementing the TCFD recommendations. As you can see on the screen at the moment, this is the program that we offer. We start with a gap analysis of your annual reports, so your mainstream report. We also look at your sustainability reports, your CDP responses if they're available, and any other disclosure that you have as an organisation. And we bring them all together and we compare them against the TCFD recommendations and also the CDSB framework as part of the methodology. From that, we produce a gap analysis, so we give you a traffic light score. So we don't give you an actual number, but we give you a traffic light of green, orange, and red to see how far how well you're doing. The next stage is part of an engagement. So again, as Peter mentioned, it's important to utilise the skills and resources that already exist within your organisation. So if you are part of the sustainability team and you're not talking to the risk team, then that conversation probably needs to start happening. So we can help facilitate that conversation through this program, through interviews with internal stakeholders. We find out a little bit more about the wider reporting processes and how the TCFD recommendations can fit within the processes that you already have, but we also then help you start having those conversations with those people. Finally, we provide you then a analysis, a report that presents all this information with some recommendations, and we also can provide ongoing support for the next reporting cycle. This program is designed to help you understand the TCFD recommendations further. We also provide some insights into best practice against your peers by providing you with case study examples of organisations that have already started implementing parts of the TCFD recommendations. At the moment, as far as I've seen, there's no organisation that is fully compliant, but there are certainly elements that we can start drawing some good practice out of. And it also helps to build an internal business case. If you are interested, we hope that you're interested, please do email us. So my email will be at the end of the presentation. You can also find out more on our website. And with that, I'm going to pass back to Mike.
Thank you very much, Gemma. So these are just a few ways we can support you, and we'd love to discuss these with you in a bit more detail. Now we have a bit of time for questions. So I have a couple of questions that were sent over, so I'll start with that. The first question is from Adam. Thank you for your question. Adam says that his clients are asking what is the expected implementation timeline for the TCFD, and what is our view? Well, I can do one better, Adam. I can share with you, if I might, maybe I can't. But I can talk through it. The TCFD's own view on this. I did just get this presentation right, so I might just be able to share this. But as I share this, the TCFD has proposed a 5-year implementation timeline. So this is sort of macro timeline for the market on its own, and but they see it sort of as a curve, starting with a few leading companies beginning to experiment and implement elements of the recommendations, and then throughout the year, those who have started already continue to improve their reporting, and as the market sees progress here, then more and more join, and perhaps all of this process is supported by a few more sort of elements of support, for example, to regulators or others. Now, what we have seen with the group of these committed companies that we work with is, sorry, apologies for the small diagram, but here is the diagram. As you can see, I believe it's towards the end of the TCFD recommendation report. What we have seen with our own businesses that we work with is that the 3-year timeline seems about right. This is also important if you think about it in a macro perspective. It's widely accepted that 2020 is a tipping point in terms of emissions, and so it makes sense to do your business planning in that context as well. 3 years also gives you perhaps a year to experiment internally, then publish some of your experimentation in your annual report in the next year, and then go forward in the 3rd year. Now, it's important to say that this is genuinely a journey, and it is going to take probably more than 3 years. 5 years is definitely more realistic to implement this, and that's fine. It's important to begin somewhere where you're comfortable and build on that. We also have a question from Johan. Thank you for your question. Johan says, our investor relations department is not getting direct requests from TCFD aligned financial reporting. We think there would be risks associated with just starting out on TCFD aligned reporting. As a result, we are unsure whether we should go for it or not. What would you say are the opportunities related to TCFD aligned reporting? Well, that's a very good question, Johan. Thank you. It's important to understand that the TCFD reporting is not only about reporting around the risks that your business is exposed to. Hopefully, through this process, you will identify the risks, and you will be able to work with your colleagues that are engaged in this process already to manage these risks. And hopefully, what you will end up reporting is how you are managing these risks and how you are safeguarding your business for the future. It is also important to understand that this is a way to give a better idea to your investors about the opportunities that lie within a transition to a low carbon economy. So we talked about transition risks, but there are also transition opportunities, and these are very important to communicate in a way that the finance community understands and can understand why your business might be a preferred investment. And last but not least, I would draw your attention, I will try to find that slide here, to the voice of the investors that have already spoken about this. There is quite a lot of communication from the investment community, signals from the investment community about the need for TCFD aligned disclosures. And we also have, there are also reports, for example, from S&P Global Ratings about how they will be incorporating the TCFD recommendations into their rating processes. So this will hopefully also improve or maintain the way you are rated. So there are quite a few opportunities there. These are the messages I've received. Peter, Gemma, have you received any on your end?
Yes, we've received a few questions as well. One of them is asking, as a company that operates in a sector where financial risk from climate change is not as apparent as others, what is the value of implementing the TCFD recommendations? Peter, I'll let you answer that one.
Okay, thanks. I think this is a common question that's certainly asked. But what we're seeing, particularly with those organisations that are beginning to implement TCFD recommendations, and particularly sort of using drawing again on scenario analysis. I think when organisations are starting to look forward and seeing how some of these potential future pathways start to play out, they are identifying sort of the second and third order risks that certainly weren't previously apparent to them when looking at shorter timeframes and in existing enterprise risk management or financial modelling. So yeah, really, we certainly advocate implementing TCFD recommendations really across all sectors. There's a great deal of uncertainty in how future paths play out, and it's not really something that you can assume will not be material to your business. It's something that you need to consider and begin to embed, even if they're not currently apparent. Certainly risks and opportunities are likely to change, and constant reviewing and assessing of those risks and opportunities is going to be needed. And yeah, those second and third order risks, sort of, yeah, as previously mentioned, the supply chain risks or the curbs on economic conditions, curbs on economic growth, things such as climate migration, new migrant status, the climate migrant is certainly something that is going to have potentially quite significant impact, and something that's not currently apparent. So yeah, we certainly advocate implementing TCFD recommendations across sectors, and really there could be value there, and it's something that really can't be ignored or assumed away.
Thanks, Peter. And we also have one more question from Suzanne, asking about our point of view about the use of ERM frameworks, so that's the COSO framework, or ISO 31000. Mike, do you want to answer this question?
Sure, happy to. Well, we wouldn't want to pick a side here. Obviously, that's possibly that's a bit beyond our expertise. But one thing I wanted to flag up is that the World Business Council for Sustainable Development is actually working with COSO, and they have published an initial report, an initial guidance for applying enterprise risk management to environmental, social, and governance-related risks. So there is already a bit of work happening with COSO in this matter. So we will be sure to also add a link to that in our follow-up email. Hopefully that'll be a useful way for you to get started there as well. And certainly, you know, the businesses we have talked to, COSO does seem to come up quite often. So that's definitely an interesting avenue to explore. All right, I think it's coming up to the end of the hour, so I wouldn't want to keep you any longer. Thank you again very much for your time. Thank you also to Gemma and Peter for your presentations. Hopefully you found this webinar useful. We try to be as practical as possible. And please feel free to get in touch with us. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you. Bye-bye.